Good morning. My name is Bill McCamley. I'm the Secretary of the New Mexico Workforce Solutions Department, and we'd like to welcome you along with the Secretary of Tourism, Jen Schreier, and Kathy Cornell from the New Mexico Hospitality Association to talk a little bit about some of the COVID-safe practices that the state is asking you all to implement so that we can keep functioning as much as we can and do it in a way that is as safe as possible for both workers and folks using your facilities. So if we could go to the next slide. Thank you. Just a little bit of an introduction. We use a lot of jargon sometimes in state government and people have a hard time sometimes understanding what that means. So there's four basic agencies that you all should be familiar with as we go through this process. The first one is OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. It's a federal program, but it is administered here in New Mexico by the Department of the Environment. And they're in charge of making sure that workplaces are safe. In the case of COVID, making sure that workplaces are following the guidelines that the state has administered. So making sure everyone wears masks, social distancing, all those things which we'll talk about in a second. They're the ones in charge of enforcing those direct regulations. The health department is in charge of coming up with a lot of the specific regulations based on someone's health regarding to COVID. And as an example for that, there are some pre-existing conditions that people can have and still stay on employment, which I'll talk about in a second. But they are the experts in coming up with those different priorities. Next is my department, the Department of Workforce Solutions. We do a lot of workforce training and placement, and we've got a lot of offices, I think 17 or 18 of them around the state, whose job it is to help people find jobs. We also run the New Mexico Unemployment Office, which, as many of you can understand, has been a little busy lately, and we've got some specific questions on how that process works that I'll be getting to later in the presentation and through questions. Lastly, but certainly not least, we have the Department of Tourism, that's Secretary Schreier's department, and their job is to market New Mexico as a worldwide destination for travel. It is one of the top economic generators for New Mexico. We understand that there are some challenges with that right now, which she'll be talking about. But those are the four state agencies which you should be familiar with. Next slide, please. Okay. There are some COVID-safe practices that every single person in the state, every single business in the state is being asked to follow in order to make sure that everyone stays as safe as possible. First is this: if you can work from home, please let your employees do so. If you've got HR, accounting folks, people in that type of category that might be able to have a good computer connection, a phone, and broadband at home, if you can let them work remotely, please allow them to do so they can keep socially distant so we don't spread this thing. Next, if people do have to be in a workplace, how do we arrange that there is at least 6 feet of distance between individuals whenever possible? And for places where they've got customers coming in, a really good example of that is grocery stores, where you see a lot of folks that are marking with tape 6-foot distance markings on the ground when you're in checkout lines. And a lot of them are actually doing one-way arrows through their different aisles to try to keep people as far apart as possible. How do we close common areas? Break rooms, common areas outside where people congregate. We are social creatures. We like to congregate, especially at work. The old water cooler analogy comes to mind. Please try to actually close those wherever possible. If you can have a meeting remotely, like we're doing right now on Zoom, please do so people don't congregate together. And please, one of the most important, vital things that we can do is make sure folks have face coverings or masks and wear them in the workplace when they're in the presence of others. That is really important, and it is one of the things that health officials are now recognizing as one of the best weapons we have against fighting COVID. Next slide, please. Thank you. Continuing, if you can follow those things, those are the requirements. In addition, we ask that you train all your employees on how you clean and disinfect your workspaces. So for those of you all in the hotel industry specifically, that's going to include the folks doing housekeeping and the people at the front desk that are in areas that need to be sanitized very regularly. Can you make sanitizer available, and even more importantly, hand washing facilities so that people can make sure they have their hands washed all the time? Hand washing, we touch our face quite a bit. Most of the time we don't do it on purpose, but it's one of the best ways for the germs to spread. And if we wash our hands regularly, it stops that. Once again, don't just say, hey, use gloves all the time, because if you put on gloves, you touch something that's infected, you touch your face, that doesn't really do any good. So we really want to encourage hand washing and sanitation. We want to prohibit employees who've had close contact with a person who we know has tested positive for COVID from returning to work until authorized by the DOH to do so. That is called contact tracing. They want to make sure that someone who's tested positive quarantines until I believe they've had at least 1 or 2 negative tests, and that they've been able to get in touch with all the people that that person has been in contact with and isolate them as well. That's the best way that we know to stop the spread of this thing in our communities. How do we minimize non-essential travel? So I know this is tough in the hotel industry, but in terms of people coming into New Mexico, they are being asked to quarantine unless they're essential workers for 14 days. And then for everything we didn't address here, there's CDC and OSHA guidelines that we're asking people to follow as well. Next slide, please. This is important. We're asking everybody to screen their employees if you can. The best way to do it's on a daily basis. If you have touchless thermometers, making sure that people don't have fever, if folks are coughing as they're coming in, if they've got shortness of breath, all these different things. If you have an employee that is showing some of these symptoms, please ask them to go home and go get tested at the New Mexico Department of Health. Testing is free, and you can find information at that link below. Furthermore, we're going through these slides a little quickly, and I know that people might not have time to click on the links. This conversation will be recorded and put up on the Department of Workforce Solutions YouTube site, and all the links will be included in that recording. So if you can't get any of the links on these slides by myself or Secretary Schreier, know that they will be there after this is done. Next slide, please. Okay, what are some of the recommendations in terms of best practices for following those regulations? Get a communication plan where you can talk to your workers on a regular basis and be available to answer questions they might have. And that can include workshops such as this. Please make sure you've got a team leader or a team whose job it is to make sure that all of these COVID safe practices are getting, first of all, communicated, and secondly, implemented at your workplaces. Making sure that if you've got a vulnerable employee, and I'll talk about them in a second, if there's a way that you can get them working at home or in a space in your area that is not near anybody else, please, please, please try to do that as much as you possibly can. If you can retain a daily log for at least 4 weeks of all the customers that have come in and out of your workplace, that will allow the Department of Health in what is called that contact tracing strategy to know who's been around in case there's a positive person. And many of you in the hotel industry, you do that anyway with check-in and check-out. So that's really, really great. And if you can try to make sure your HVAC equipment is as maintained as possible, the more airflow through any area that we can get, the better it is for making sure that the viral load, so the amount of virus going through the air, is reduced. Next slide, please. Okay, so there are many, many guidelines specifically for hotels, resorts, and lodges because of the amount of exposure that you have to different people all the time. Make sure that you've got max occupancy and hygiene requirements. A lot of times we're asking people to reduce to either 25 or 50% of different places, workspaces, depending on where you're at. Please try to make sure you're following that. Limit room occupancy to same households. We don't want people from different households staying in the same room if we can. That'll reduce spread. Make sure that if you've got people that want food, you encourage room service and try to take out those self-service food bars and refreshments. I know a lot of y'all have water and coffee and snacks in your lobbies. Please take those out, because if different people are touching those all the time, that's a really good way for the virus to spread. And make sure with room service, you've got those paper menus so you can discard them after every single use. Please suspend valet service. We don't want people spreading the virus through touching of keys or door handles or inside cars. Make sure you limit your pools to only lap swimming lessons. We don't want people congregating inside of pools, playing water polo, kids playing in there. That's the way a virus really spreads. And if you do provide food service in a restaurant, please make sure you are following the restaurant guidelines currently in place. And that means in New Mexico right now, no in-person inside seating and patio seating at 50%. Next slide, please. Okay, no communal hot tubs. We talked about that with pools, same things with hot tubs, saunas, and workout gyms. And if you've got a private hot tub or sauna in your place, please make sure they are sanitized very, very thoroughly after every use. Make sure that your guests and your workers have hygiene information upon check-in so that they know where the washrooms are, how to make sure things are sanitized, that sort of thing moving forward. Make sure you've got directions for stairs. A lot of people are uncomfortable using elevators in this COVID environment for good reasons. Make sure people know where the stairs are in case they want to use those. The American Lodging Association has done a really good job putting rules out on room cleaning. Please make sure you adhere to those and remove a lot of those papers, pens, different books, extra towels, all those things in rooms that different people can touch all the time. We don't want folks having to touch something someone else has touched in the past without cleaning. Same thing with hair dryers, irons, coffee machines. If you've got them in your rooms, please take them out and try to provide them upon request. And then when folks are done, make sure your folks are cleaning them very, very thoroughly. And make sure that housekeeping is only provided based on a request by guests. I know a lot of you guys, it's your operations to clean rooms every single day, no matter what. If you can take those out and say, hey, look, we're not going to clean your room unless you specifically ask for it, that will limit the exposure for your staff to a lot of the folks that are coming in and out of rooms. Next slide, please. Whoop. I'm sorry, I had this for construction and field operations. These are the last ones for hotel lodging, and I apologize for the mistake on the top. Make sure that you've got staff breaks. No, these are actually for hotels, and I'm sorry about the top. Make sure you've got breaks in your workspaces at your front desk especially, and that you've got more hand washing opportunities for those folks at those front desks. If you do have to have people standing next to each other at your front desk, please provide plexiglass guards between workspaces and also between them and the customers. You're seeing that at a lot of grocery stores right now where you've got checkout lines where they've got those barriers between them and the customers to prevent people from breathing on each other. If you can do contactless payment and receipts, that's great. A lot of you are doing that anyway. Please do that all the time if you can. Same thing with mobile check-in and checkout. You've got a lot of folks that are doing that anyway. Please try to make that universal if you can. Screen employees, as I pointed out, coming in with that non-contact thermometer. If they've got a fever of over 100.4, that should be your sign to send them home and ask them to get tested. And if you do allow pets, please make sure that you limit the guests to keeping those pets in their rooms. I know people like to take their pets out for walks and that sort of thing, but that is a really good way for the virus to spread. And once again, I apologize for the miscommunication on the top. Next slide, please. Okay, I'm going to go through this really quickly. If you are a business of under 500 employees, the federal government, this is not here in the state level, but the Federal Department of Labor is enforcing the Families First Coronavirus Act. So it provides for paid sick leave and family leave for people that, for the sick leave, have gotten tested positive for the virus or are asked to stay home and quarantine from the Department of Labor if they've been exposed to other people. And what you do is you give them 2 weeks of paid sick leave. And at the bottom, you can see the link to the IRS site that shows you how to get a tax credit every quarter that can pay for all of the sick leave that you are giving. Family leave can be given up to 10 weeks at 2/3 of the regular rate of pay when people don't have, for instance, childcare because there's a lockdown order, things like that from COVID-19. I'm not going to go over it too much more, but you can look up at the Department of Labor all the details about the Family First Coronavirus Act. Once again, this is not at the state level. This is a U.S. Department of Labor initiative, and they are in charge of enforcing those rules. Next slide, please. Okay. This comes from the Department of Health. If you have a high-risk worker, they should not be coming back to work. So anyone 65 or older, already in that category. Please ask them not to come back because if they do get COVID, they are at a very, very high risk of having a serious health emergency or unfortunately for dying. And it's really, really sad news, but some of you may have heard this morning that Herman Cain, the former presidential candidate, unfortunately passed away this morning. He was in that category. And so please, please, please be considerate of all of your older workers. And if they're home, they can stay home and apply for unemployment and receive good cause. Now, let me explain that for a second. Normally on unemployment, people, if they leave voluntarily, are not allowed to get it unless there's a good reason. During the COVID situation, we here at the Workforce Solutions Department are allowing for people to voluntarily leave their jobs if they are 65 or older, or they can provide a note from a medical provider with these issues. These are the pre-existing conditions from the Department of Health that says you are at a much higher risk if you get COVID of being hurt or dying from it. So things like chronic lung disease, if you've got asthma, if you've had serious heart conditions, if you've had HIV, liver issues, diabetes, those sorts of things. If your workers can provide a medical documentation to our office, then they will be allowed to get unemployment, all else being even. Next slide, please. Okay, now you might have some workers that might not want to come back to work even though you are offering it to them if they do not have a good cause. So if you are following all these COVID practices, if they do not have a medical provider's note for a pre-existing condition, if they're under the age of 65, they should be coming back to work if you're offering them similar work to what they had before. If they do not come back to work, if you offer it to them and they refuse, you can click on that link right there. It takes you a PDF document and shows you where to email it so you can send it into our office so we can investigate. If we determine that a worker does not have good cause, they may be ineligible to get unemployment. You can't turn down a good solid piece of work that is equivalent to what they were getting before the COVID situation. What is not good cause? Not good cause is I'm just scared of COVID in general. That's not something that can be allowed to be good cause. Or, hey, I might be making more on unemployment than my job. That's not good cause either. We talked about the good cause though, if there are issues with the workplace. So if they can prove that an employer is not following these conditions or that they've got a situation with these medical conditions, then that can be good cause. Next slide, please. Our basic message here, this is a joint responsibility. Employees are supposed to come back to work if they are able to, and there's not a medical reason for them not to, and the work is the same as they had before they might have gotten furloughed. However, we are asking employers to get some responsibility as well. Please follow health guidelines. Please make sure that all of those things that we were just talking about, that your employees are wearing masks, that you have social distancing, and all those things are put in place. And if we take these responsibilities together, that is going to be the way we move forward in the most advantageous way. Next slide, please. Okay, New Mexico Safe Certified. I'm actually going to leave that to Secretary Schreier to talk in more depth about. She's the expert on that program, but it's a great way for you all as employers to get training and resources for this issue. And then next couple slides, next slide, please. There are some ways to get PPE. So she's got some resources there with the New Mexico Safe Certified program. Also, you can contact New Mexico Association of Commerce and Industry. They're really helping find hand sanitizer, masks, that sort of thing. And there's contact information there. And then next slide is the Emergency Supply Collaborative, which is actually being run out of New Mexico Tech. Once again, we will provide all of these links in the YouTube presentation that we were recording and putting it up afterwards. So you can find all these links to these folks that are willing to help you at these places. We're not going to go to questions yet. We're going to go to Secretary Schreier from the Department of Tourism, and she's got some things to say. And then we will move on to Kathy Como from the New Mexico Hospitality Organization. Then we'll take questions. Thank you all very much. Secretary Schreier.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Secretary McCamley, for hosting this webinar for our industry. As you know, this particular sector of our economy is hard hit by the coronavirus, and it's been extremely challenging for our industry to navigate these waters during this time. So thank you to Kathy Como of the New Mexico Hospitality Association, Jeff Mahan of Santa Fe Lodgers Association, and Adrian Montoya with the Greater Albuquerque Hotel and Lodgers Association for joining us today and promoting this to your members, so that way we can continue to communicate really what we have at the state level to support your efforts during this time. Next slide, please. So I don't feel like I can talk about, you know, how we can recover unless we talk about the reality of what we're seeing with our industry, not only in our state, but across the nation and frankly across the world. This is impacting our industry more than any other industry around. And so just in the US travel, we're looking at a loss of $500 billion in 2020. In both our food service, lodging and accommodation, air transportation, and some other sectors within tourism. Next slide, please. So as we're looking at our visitor spend in New Mexico and how that's comparing to the United States, it's a very similar trend. We're a little bit above the national average, but this is greatly impacting our economy as a whole. And we're seeing 80% less compared to the previous year so far. But I want you to notice the curve and how that is directly correlated with our public health order. We know that this industry is very elastic. So once we are able to do what we do best, we know that this industry will come back. We know that there is pent-up demand, and we all as an industry need to keep on fighting. Next slide, please. Here we have New Mexico hotel revenue and how much it has dropped. You can see from the schematic of how New Mexico compares to other states. Next slide, please. New Mexico hotel revenue continued. So this goes by region. We have, several different regions in our state, and they're all pretty much following the same path, just varying slightly. Next slide, please. Employment, this is what breaks my heart, and I know this breaks everyone's heart that's on the call today, is we really value our associates and our employees. A lot of our hotels have had people part of their team for decades, and so it's been very difficult as we've navigated these waters of unemployment and us having to let some really talented folks go as we have to press pause on travel and tourism. So right now we have lost approximately 30,000 jobs since the beginning of COVID. But again, we do know once travel and tourism comes back, we will see those jobs come back as well. Next slide, please. So we all know this, but I think it's really important. It's a great reminder as we talk about a lot of our communities throughout the state are really dependent upon tourism for their overall economy, especially those that have economies that are dependent upon visitor spend of 25% or more. I am deeply concerned, we are deeply concerned about those demand factors and how that's going to impact our infrastructure. We're concerned about foreclosures. We're concerned about abandoned tourism development projects. And we're also concerned about workforce migration, especially in the rural communities and those that have a big portion of their economy tourism. Next slide, please. So as we talk about what does it mean to travel in a positive world, we need to figure this out because we have not only a workforce that we need to bring back, but we have incredible assets here for people to enjoy, but we can't do that until we figure out how to do this safely. Next slide, please. We know that from our research about consumer behavior that consumers really want to feel safe. Denial of entry to all customers and guests that have a fever, they want to see that. Assurance that customer-facing employees are required to be tested. I mean, these are some of the things that are coming from our consumers of what they want to see. And I know this industry has stepped up and are actually really implementing and going above and beyond what is being required at the state level, because a lot of us, a lot of you run hotels that are part of corporate chains like our Marriotts, our Hyatts, and they have very high standards. I want to say thank you to all of you for implementing those standards. Next slide, please. We also know that people want to travel. They are looking to travel by car, and really that their first trip is going to be the friends and family. So while we do have travel restrictions, we do know that people still want to travel. I think that's a misperception out there. We know that as an industry that people want to keep on traveling, but I think there's a misperception that people are too scared to travel right now, and that's not necessarily true. Next slide, please. So how to ignite recovery? Again, this research is showing what consumers want, and if these are factors that people will decide no longer to visit a destination. And I think number 7 is very interesting. If there's too many locals not wearing masks, they don't want to visit that destination. if COVID-19 cases are on the rise, they don't want to go to that destination. If they're considered not managing the pandemic well, they don't want to travel there. And I think this is really one of our competitive advantages at some point, is that we have a very strong reputation nationally of managing this pandemic extremely well. And so this is going to help us when it's an appropriate time to travel again. Next slide, please. So as we look at how we move forward, we're going to take a very disciplined approach. First and foremost, we're going to be looking at safety and consumer confidence building, and then allowing organic travel to happen. And this is coming from the tourism department. We are not focused on marketing at all right now for bringing tourism to New Mexico. We're focusing on safety and consumer confidence. We know there's travel that is currently happening, but it's kind of flattened. But we're really taking a public health lead. We are focusing on community safety first. We are really looking at a data-driven approach and really collaborating with our private and public partners. Next slide, please. So reopening New Mexico safely. Next slide. One of the hardest things that our industry has to face is that our industry brings people together. And we hold events, and we do festivals, and we hold workshops and education and socials and weddings, and we provide experiences for people to enrich their lives. And what makes it so hard right now is that those things are not safe to do. And that's what our data shows us. And so again, our industry has been so hard hit, and it's been pretty much brought to a halt. And so as we think about how we move forward, we have to be better and smarter, and we have to be safe. And so our department, in partnership with the New Mexico Hospitality Association and several other CVBs throughout the state, came together and launched New Mexico Safe Promise. And I really want to thank all those people that came together. If this was a private-public partnership where Visit Albuquerque and Tourism Santa Fe and Visit Las Cruces, Town of Taos, Ruidoso, Farmington, we had great representation of different destinations throughout the state that said, hey, we're going to take this serious, and we're going to launch this campaign to really encourage and inspire hearts and minds to make this promise of wearing a mask, doing social distancing, and really committing to opening up our economy in a safe way. And so again, I want to really commend Kathy Como and her leadership, and all those different partners, as well as the New Mexico Society of Association Executives, because they also were heavily involved in this. Jason Espinosa partnered with us to create the New Mexico Safe Certified Program. And this program now has over 60 communities that have businesses that have gone through the certification program, which is extremely exciting. Hotels, we have over 400 that have started the process of getting trained and getting certified, which is excellent. So this has been a really important process for us to start and to lead. We actually got contacted by the state of Hawaii that wants to replicate this program. The state of Colorado has looked at this program as a model as well. And so we are leading our industry on how to do this right. And I really want to commend not only our partners, but everyone that is taking the first step to get certified, because this is how we build consumer confidence. This is how we open up our economy. Next slide, please. We launched this week our brand new campaign asset for New Mexico Safe Promise, and the whole messaging is around each of us as individuals, as a general public, needs to do our part, so that way our favorite businesses can open, because this has to be a collaboration with the general public as well, because it puts our associates in difficult positions of asking guests and our patrons to wear masks. And so we are trying to really encourage hearts and minds to do what's right, to make the promise, and to wear a mask, because if we can get 80% of our general public wearing masks, we can slow the spread of the coronavirus so it's more manageable. So let's go ahead and watch this asset.
It's up to each of us to play it safe and slow the spread, so we can still
safely reconnect with friends, get our breakfast burrito fix, indulge in a little retail therapy,
or just unwind at the end of the day. Help keep each other safe.
and our favorite local businesses open.
Make the promise at nmsafepromise.org.
So we have this asset running on our traditional broadcast. We have radio, we have billboards, and we have a digital campaign really focused on helping our businesses open. And you can go to New Mexico Safe Promise to make the promise. I encourage all of you to encourage your employees and your guests to make that promise. There has been some businesses that have done an excellent job of integrating this into their booking system. So when you have a guest book a hotel room, they are prompted to take the promise, and that really helps communicate that we are taking this serious, and it manages the expectations of your guests. And so LaFauna did a great job of integrating it. We've seen some great integration with some other businesses with their social media, and man, it's been great to see how these businesses have been celebrated for taking steps to protect and be safe, and their customers are celebrating them. And so I think that's just really exciting to see that movement. Next slide, please. Also part of the effort, we had several communities put up those signs in public places, which we're very grateful for because it is making a difference. We've seen a huge increase in mask wearing. And again, we don't need 100%. I would love 100%, but if we can get to 80% is going to help. And then of course, I'm sure many of you heard, we did put some advertisements back in early July, some full page ads in both Texas and Arizona with the New Mexico Safe Promise, really encouraging the traveler to do their research before they come, because we know that travel restrictions are going to change just like they are across the entire nation and the world right now on an ongoing basis. It's a very fluid. So, you know, when you're traveling international, it's very common to do your research and figure out the visa and figure out what the cultural norms are and things of that sort. But traveling domestically, we typically don't do that. We just hop in the car or hop on a plane and go. And so it's almost like we have to retrain the traveler that when they're traveling domestically in a COVID positive world, they need to do their homework so that way they can respect each state's travel restrictions and requirements. And one of ours, of course, is wearing a mask. Next slide, please. So I just really encourage everyone, if you have not had your business go through the New Mexico Safe Certified program, please start today. New Mexico, it's nmsafecertified.org. We are providing a lot of advertising incentives for businesses that are tourism related that go through the program and get certified. That includes advertising in New Mexico Magazine. You get some ad credits there. You get to be a part of the PPE Purchasing Collective, which Jason Espinoza is working on launching here now. And we also are putting a business directory into the New Mexico Magazine. So you're going to be featured with New Mexico True social media sites. We want to celebrate and honor the businesses that are taking this serious, and we want you to know that you're not alone. We're going to provide as much support as we can as we navigate the waters of a COVID positive world, and we're going to do that together. Next slide. So I really want to say thank you again to our partners, our industry partners. This has been tough, and we have a long road ahead of us. And the only way we're going to get through it is if we have grit and we collaborate. And I want to, before I kick it over to Kathy, I just want to again thank her leadership. I want to thank the leadership of our associations because we have to do this together. And I just want to continue to foster those relationships and answer questions that any of you might have as we move forward. So with that, I'm going to kick it over to Kathy before we go to questions.
Thank you, Secretary Schreier. And I won't take up too much time because I know there are lots of questions out there, but I just wanted to take a couple of seconds. First, I want to give sincere thanks to Secretary McCamley and Secretary Schreier for being so accessible and being so responsive. It's only been a few days ago that Jeff Mahan with Santa Fe Lodgers and Adrian Montoya with Greater Albuquerque Hotel and Lodging Association sort of brought up this issue that the hospitality industry could use some guidance around some of the unemployment issues and some workforce issues. And only in New Mexico are we sitting here, you know, a week, 10 days later to have this meeting. And I deal with a lot of people around the country, a lot of my cohorts, and I know that state partners are not as responsive in other states, and that we have true partnerships here that really make life easier for all of us in the hospitality industry. So I want to say thank you to them. And of course, thank you to Jeff and Adrian for starting this process. And I just wanted to touch base on a couple of things that Secretary Schreier already addressed. As you know, we're working very actively with New Mexico Safe Promise and Safe Certified. We just had a webinar right before this call this morning talking about the next phase of how we want to really start to promote the businesses that have gone through the Safe Certified program and the businesses that are participating in Safe Promise, so that we can start to get the word out about what amazing businesses we have and what a safe place New Mexico is to live in. And also, I want to encourage you to let us know your concerns and issues going forward. Our next job for the Hospitality Association is basically going to be working on making sure that we advocate for the industry with policymakers, because as you know, we're already starting to ramp up for legislative session 2021, which will start in January. And we want to be really actively engaged in making sure that policymakers around the state at the local and the state level know what issues we're facing and what impact COVID is having on our businesses. And we'll start that process actually next Monday. We'll be presenting to the Economic and Rural Development Committee and sharing with them exactly what businesses are having to go through and what challenges we're facing. And also, we're going to start to brag about how amazing our industry has been at being at the forefront of safe practices, and of course, being leaders in the industry at the state and national level in developing safe practices, implementing those safe practices, and making sure that they're taking care of employees and customers at every level. So I encourage you to be in contact with us. Let us know what issues you have. Let us know some of your success stories so we can start to share those as well. And I look forward to working with all of you. And again, I just want to say thank you to Secretary McCamley and to Secretary Schreier. And I think now, I know there's lots of questions, so I think it's time to open it up for questions.
Great, thank you so much. So our first question that's coming in is there a way to see who has made the promise in New Mexico?
That's a great question. Assuming that's for me. One of the best ways to see who's made the promise is to use the hashtag New Mexico Safe Promise, and you'll be able to see so many people on social media that have made the promise right there publicly. You can go online at NM Safe Promise. It's a very quick process on that home page to make the promise, and then there's also several different social media frames and stickers that you can use to tout that you made the promise. And the more that we can encourage our employees to do it and our patrons and make it part of your own campaign as we try to open the economy. And this is the more that we push that out, the better. So again, you can use the hashtag and see who's made that promise.
Thank you. Next question is, can we get trained even if we are not allowed to open yet?
This is a great question. So we have modules. It started as a tourism pilot. So it had different modules for the different sectors within tourism if the CSPs had been released from the public health order. There are certain sectors of tourism that do not yet have CSPs that have been released officially. For example, museums. or event centers. And what we can do during this time is you can go through the office module. And that's what the Department of Cultural Affairs is having its museums, since they're not open, go through the office module, so that way they get started in the process. But once we do have CSPs that are officially launched for museums, we will have a module specifically for those event venues or for museums. So I think that's a great question. I think the office module is a great example of how you can do it. And you can work directly with the New Mexico Society of Association executives to be able to pick the right one for your business, depending on what it is.
Perfect. And this question kind of goes hand in hand with that a little bit. They're asking the same question, but just in terms of visitor centers and event centers. And I think you touched on that a little bit.
Yeah, I think, again, I think that office module is a really good option, especially for visitor centers and event centers. I know right now they're not open all the way, but there is still activity. That back of the house is still happening a little bit. So that office module would be great.
Great, thank you, Secretary. Next question is, I see a lot of push for wearing masks, but not much emphasis on cleanliness as a whole. What about communicating the necessity of hand washing and keeping your environment clean to include hand washing and sanitizing common areas?
That's a great question. The commercials that we have out for the general public have been focused on the promise. And if you look at the promise on nmsafepromise.org, it does have hand washing, hygiene as one of those factors. I think we chose to really push the mask wearing because that is not a social norm typically in the United States. If you go somewhere in China, then people will be wearing masks. That it hasn't been as difficult for some of those countries to adhere to that social norm of wearing a mask. But in the United States, it's been a little bit difficult to get people wearing a mask because it's just not a social norm here. And so that's why you see an emphasis on that. However, if you go through any of the certification programs, every single module is hyper focused on cleanliness. And those were all developed by industry for industry. And we took a bottom up approach through the governor's office and had different subcommittees that worked really hard on how to put together COVID safe practices per sector, which was a huge endeavor. And Daniel Schlegel is on the line today from the governor's office. And I just want to commend him because it was a heavy, heavy lift that had several cabinet secretaries, that had hundreds of people through the state that really thought deeply about how to do this right. And what we decided is after those CSPs were finalized and released through the public health order, we wanted to make sure, the tourism department wanted to make absolute certain that businesses had the resources and the training available to be able to educate their teams on how to operationalize these COVID safe practices. So I really encourage you to look at the New Mexico Safe Certified website and sign up for a training module. I think it'd really help a lot of our businesses implement, because ultimately we want business to know you're not alone. We're gonna be here to support you all the way through.
And if I could just add to that, yeah, your point about hand washing and cleanliness is important. If you'll notice, that's actually part of the COVID safe practices, both for employers as a generality, but also specifically for the folks in the hotel and lodging sector. I will say though that what is coming out more and more is that the spread of this virus, obviously it's still new and they're still learning a lot about it, but indoor places with folks not wearing masks seems to be one of, if not the greatest risk for people to spread this thing. And that's why, as Secretary Schreier pointed out, it is so vital that we have to do as much as we can to get people wear masks. The governor talks about all the time how the issue with seatbelts first started becoming a public thing in the late 60s and early 70s. And it took sometimes 20 years for the laws and the norms to change regarding wearing seatbelts. And now we all do it as a second nature, but we don't have 20 years on this thing. Yeah. And I think that's why over and over again, the mask thing has been such an emphasis. And it's turned into some reason for a political issue where it really shouldn't be. If you put a mask over your face, there's a little bit of protection for you, but more so, you are protecting other people if you have the virus. And there's a lot of folks out there that might be asymptomatic. They're saying 30 to 40% of the folks out there that have the virus may spread it, but aren't coughing, don't have fevers. And that's why it's really so vital that we all wear masks whenever we're around other people. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Next question is, what qualifies a business for the business benefits you mentioned for the New Mexico Safe certification or CERT advertising? Our HR department has taken this training and subsequently trained our staff. Can we put the New Mexico Safe CERT in our marketing that our customers can see?
Great question. Yes and yes. So for businesses that are tourism related, and you can contact New Mexico Association of Society executives, and they will provide details on which exact modules have those advertising credits associated with them. And they will provide your contact information to New Mexico Magazine, and New Mexico Magazine will reach out to you for those ad credits so you can realize those. In regards to the marketing, absolutely. There is a whole resource guide on how to leverage the New Mexico Safe certified marketing and integrate it into yours. So I provided a couple examples of some of the businesses in the presentation and how they've done it on social media, on their website, their booking platform. We've seen some really incredible integrations, some super smart marketing folks out there that have done a great job. Email marketing, and once you go through the program, you'll start getting regular email updates, whether that's the public health order being revised and what that means for your business, but also like best practices on how to best use the marketing component of New Mexico Safe Certified.
Thank you, Secretary. The next question is, nice job with the video asset. Will this be aired out of state or in state only?
Currently, it is in-state only. And thank you very much. We have a creative team that has stepped up to the plate and has actually volunteered quite a few hours of their time and talent. And so we're very grateful to that creative team. I just wanted to give them a little plug too. So thank you very much for that comment.
Why are people not being fined for wearing masks? I noticed everyone standing in line at food carts with no social distancing and no masks.
That is a great question. What I know is that it is being enforced. It is very difficult to enforce statewide for every single person to wear a mask. I know our state police are engaging with folks who are not wearing a mask. They are actually handing out free masks at this time. And you know, there's some communities that are enforcing masks throughout the state and some that are not. And so it's very difficult at the local level of how those are being enforced. Daniel, do you have anything you want to add to that particular question about enforcement?
Thank you, Secretary Schreier. And this is Dan Schlegel from the Governor's Office, Small Business and Entrepreneurship Advisor, and have been deeply embedded in the Economic Recovery Council as well, and working with Secretary Schreier and Secretary McCamley on recovery efforts. On the enforcement question, the state police have been all across the state enforcing, in particular, violations of the public health order from businesses who are not supposed to be open, or referring issues of workplace practices to the OSHA department, something that Secretary McCamley referenced earlier. So there is significant enforcement on that side, and OSHA has a lot of latitude there. When it comes to the general public not wearing masks, they are subject to a $100 citation. And like the Secretary said, there are certain municipalities that are very much supporting state police in those efforts, and there have been citations that have been issued in various parts of the state. But then there are some areas that are not as cooperative, unfortunately, even though the Attorney General has issued a statement that local law enforcement are to be enforcing this order. So it is a little bit of a mixed bag across the state, but I think it's we're seeing positive signs of compliance, which is good. I think some enforcement has encouraged more and more people to take it on.
Thank you.
And before you go,
next
Stacy, can I add something to that real quick? I do want to point out, this has been a little bit in the news lately, that this is just more of a restaurant issue, but there are 9 restaurants around the state that have refused to follow the governor's public health order and continue dine-in service. We have been working with the environment department, and if those folks have their restaurant license removed from them, we are giving employees at these places what we call good cause to apply for unemployment. It's an unsafe practice to not follow the health guidelines, and furthermore, it's really unfair. There's 9 restaurants. It's a very, very small minority. We love all of the businesses that are really trying to find creative, new ways of serving customers and yet keeping their doors open with outdoor patio seating and all that sort of stuff. And it's really unfortunate that some of these employers have chosen this route to just flout the rules. Not only is it dangerous for their employers and for their employees and the communities that they're in, but furthermore, if the spread continues, that's going to increase the length of time that some of these public health measures are in place. The more we contain the spread, the more we knock the virus down, the better it's going to be for all businesses. So if you're in a community, as an employer, the fact that you're following these COVID safe practices is not only going to be just safe immediately, but it'll let us get back to normal sooner rather than later. And it'll help everyone in New Mexico all act as team players in this. Thank you.
Thank you. The next one is, I own a short-term rental property. I canceled and refunded a couple coming from Phoenix for 4 weeks this summer and a couple coming from Dallas for 6 weeks. I have my guests abide by the quarantine order for drive-in visitors, and I gave up all of my June-August business. But I see visitors from those states at hotels for short stays all over town and have not heard of any enforcement. Is there any enforcement out there for this?
Thank you, Cynthia, for your question. I think there's a couple things within your comment and your question. I want to unpack to make sure that everyone understands what the public health order requires by law versus business decisions. So in regards to the quarantine does not say that you cannot come here if you're from out of state. The quarantine order requires you, if you come from out of state, either by car or by flight, to quarantine for 14 days. And a quarantine means that you cannot be out in public. And so in regards to seeing some other people from out of state, I think I want to remind everyone that just because you see someone in a car that maybe has a license plate from out of state or someone with an accent, that doesn't mean that they haven't been here for over 14 days. That doesn't mean that they don't live here and they have a second home. And so we need to be very careful that we're not profiling, first and foremost. Second, I think that business owners do have a responsibility to educate and inform their guests of our quarantine law here in New Mexico. So that means that if you have guests that are coming from out of state, they understand that we have a quarantine right now. We also know that it is very difficult for businesses to enforce. That's something that is very difficult because of our booking systems, not knowing exactly where people are coming from. We don't know how long they've been in New Mexico. They might have stayed a couple days in Santa Fe, a couple days in Albuquerque. They might have been in a short-term rental for 14 days for all we know. So we understand it is very difficult from an enforcement standpoint, but it is what we are communicating to our hotel and lodging partners is please educate and inform your guests of the current public health order in regards to the 14-day quarantine.
Thank you, Secretary. Next question is, with regards to restaurants who are using tents in their parking lots, are they allowed to close the walls and use air conditioning units? And how would that differ from inside dining?
It's another great question, and I'm going to allow Daniel to pipe in here. But it's my understanding at this point, they cannot close the outdoor dining with, and have circulation like that, because it'd be very close to indoor dining. Daniel, do you have some comments here?
Yeah, thank you, Secretary, and thank you for the question. We've actually just recently, when that new order went into effect in mid-July for outdoor dining only, we added some language to the COVID safe practices for restaurants. And basically the gist of it is that open on 3 sides is considered outdoor. So if people are having tents, they can have one side that's has a sidewall, and then of course, you know, when people aren't in use for security reasons, if the operator would like to close up the tent at night, for example, that's fine, of course. But yes, it's on 3 sides, would be considered outdoor, and this is something that the OSHA team and also our public health officials weighed in on, just to ensure that there's proper circulation as if you were completely outdoors.
Thank you. How are you making people understand to wear a mask outside while exercising and walking? Many people do not wear them at local parks.
I guess I can take that one. I think the governor has been clear in all of her press conferences. I think the verbiage in the public health order is also very clear that that is a requirement. People need to bring and wear their masks. And unfortunately, creating a new social norm takes time. I know that our economy doesn't have time. And so the more we can encourage people politely to wear masks, the better.
And if I could add to that, Secretary Schreier, the thing I will add is that this is why public health orders are so important. I go to the gym pretty regularly. It's good for my head, especially during this whole thing. And when they opened back up, I started going again. Before the public health order got put into place requiring masks in gym, you only had about maybe 20 to 30% of the folks wearing masks. And as soon as it became a requirement, I have not seen one person not wearing a mask. I've seen a few chin straps where they're wearing them over their mouth and not their noses, which isn't what you're supposed to do. But for the most part, since the public health order, everybody's been wearing masks inside the gym. And that's why the public health orders are so important. And as Secretary Schreier said, it'll become more and more of a norm, but we've really just got to make it to where people are used to them.
And I also just want to add and thank the business community, because I think to Secretary McCamley's point, you know, the public health order went into effect and he saw a significant increase in compliance of mask wearing inside the gym. And that's largely because our business community has stepped up to the plate and helped with that enforcement and really helped encourage those COVID safe practices. So I want to say thank you to our business community. This has not been easy for any of you that are operators. And so your support and partnership is greatly appreciated.
Thank you. We have about 1 minute left of the webinar today. Is there any final thoughts that any of the panelists would like to share?
Yes, this is Kathy with the Hospitality Association. I just wanted to touch base with you. We did submit some questions in advance, and I know we don't have time to have those answered on the webinar today, but if I could get responses for those questions, then we can get those out to our members and make sure those get addressed.
Stacey, is this going to turn off automatically or can we stay on for another minute? I can go through them for you.
Sure, I'm not sure, but we can give it a try.
I'm not seeing a countdown. So Kathy, why don't I go through these real quick? Is that okay?
Okay, that'd be great. Thank you.
All right. So if I see a countdown timer, we'll write out some responses for you, but it looks like we're okay for now. The first question is, when the waiting week for unemployment was waived, we had several employees who had already gone through the initial waiting week, but it was later determined that anyone after 3.15, I believe, was eligible. Oh, March 15th was eligible. Yes. And so we've waived the waiting week. So anyone that had that waiting week was reimbursed for that waiting week in whenever they had that in there since March 15th, when the feds changed their directions. And then since then, we've not had a waiting week at all, and people get their payments on the week that they applied. Next question. Several employees are concerned about the dollar amount remaining in their claim versus the length of the time on the case. Let me just answer that. The dollar amount that you get almost never runs out. It's the timing that really matters. So unemployment insurance in New Mexico lasts for 26 weeks. As part of the CARES Act at the federal level that was passed in late March, an additional 13 weeks of what is called pandemic unemployment extended compensation, PEUC, was passed, giving you an additional 13 weeks. Furthermore, there's an additional 13 weeks that are now available through the normal extended unemployment program at the federal level that kicks in after a certain unemployment rate is hit. So all in, no one should be running out of unemployment at the very least until mid to late October, with all of those extensions coming in. And I checked with our lawyers on this. No one should really worry about hitting their max allocation. It's the timing that really matters. Next question. What measures are being implemented to prevent employees from fraudulently claiming health or childcare issues to obtain unemployment benefits? So we have investigators that actually look into what is good cause, which I talked about during the presentation, and which employees and workers need when they voluntarily leave a job. For the health issues, we are requiring documentation from a medical provider that someone is in a high-risk category along those lines that I talked about during the presentation. In terms of childcare, to get the family's first childcare leave, that's a federal issue at the Department of Labor. And unfortunately, I don't have their criteria for how they're determining that. And that should be a question that you might even want to run through our congressional delegation. They can get that answer from the Department of Labor, because their office is the one that actually enforces that sick leave through the Families First Act. The current system, next question, the current system allows an employee to repeatedly claim exposure to COVID-19, test for the virus, and claim paid time off until the results are obtained. What measures are being considered to prevent this repeated occurrence? So it is my understanding, once again, this is a federal issue that the federal Department of Labor enforces, but from my understanding, they're only enforcing sick leave for 1 2-week period for the sick leave portion of that Families First Act. Now, if someone can't get that again, wants to go on unemployment and can show us medical documentation that they have COVID or that they're being asked to quarantine again, that's something our investigators can look at for good cause for unemployment. But for the sick leave portion of it, then that is something that is going to have to be done at the federal level, or on our cases, they're going to have medical documentation. I will also say we've had some complaints that people are voluntarily leaving the state to go on vacation or whatever in Colorado, Arizona, Texas, coming back and saying, hey, I left the state, the governor's requiring me to quarantine, you have to give me 2 weeks of sick leave. You should see a correction in the travel ordinance today from the governor regarding that. That's not what the public health order was meant to make someone want to do. And so we should have a correction for that today. The last question I had from you, ma'am, was, as a small business owner operating as a sole proprietor and not paying into unemployment insurance, is there any other assistance I can take advantage of? It keeps going. For folks in that category, if you've run out of income, the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program was created by the federal government for you. And so you can actually backdate that to March. What you'll do is you'll apply for unemployment. If you do not report W-2 wages, you will be deemed as monetarily ineligible, because to get standard unemployment, you have had to have a certain amount of wages in the last 18 months. That's fine. That's part of the process. Once you're deemed ineligible, on your online screen for your account, a new button should pop up saying, apply for pandemic unemployment assistance. You hit that, you fill out the form, you're good to go. I would also like to point out, if you need directions for all this, we have step-by-step instructions at the Department of Workforce Solutions YouTube site. It's youtube.com/NMDWS. And you can get specific instructions for how to apply for PUA, Pandemic Unemployment Assistance, and how to certify every week. If you're going to get on any of these programs, you've got to certify your claim every week. So those are the questions that I have. And I just want to also echo Secretary Schreier and saying thank you to all of the businesses out there that are busting your tails to do the right thing and work with us as communities and as a state to get through this together. This is hard.
It's really hard.
None of us signed up, as Secretary Schreier is right, for what we're doing right now. And we're all having to problem solve every day. We're all having to come up with new and creative solutions to issues that none of us foresaw. So thank you to every single one of you who are keeping your heads up, solving problems every day, being creative, and doing everything you can to keep your workers, your customers, and your community safe. That's the way that we're going to get back to a better economy. Last thing I'll point out, the Washington Post did a really interesting story last week where they compared Arizona to New Mexico. And as you all are probably aware, Arizona opened up with restaurants and hotels and that sort of thing much earlier than New Mexico and to a much greater extent. And initially they saw their economies do better. Unfortunately, their COVID exposure went way up, hospitalizations went way up, and unfortunately, the amount of deaths went way up to almost 3 times the rate of New Mexicans. And then they had to start closing down again. And right now, their economy is in the same spot ours is, with a lot more people dead. And so what that shows is how our health is maintained will contribute directly and specifically to how our economy is maintained. Those two are absolutely linked. So the healthier we are, the better we're going to be economically. And those of you that are trying to make that happen, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Kathy, does that answer your questions?
There's one question actually, Secretary McCamley, that I think is really important for, if you would please, to address. Jennifer asked, she said that we have issues with employees not wearing masks at all times. They have been told numerous times. Do you have suggestions on how to get them on board? That's a difficult position.
It is a difficult position. That's actually the first time I've heard that. So if you were to lay them off and they claimed unemployment and you challenged it, you could actually make the argument that they are not abiding by health restrictions. Once again, there's a joint responsibility here. We understand that employers have a responsibility to create a safe and work environment, but employees do too. They should be coming back to work if they don't have one of those conditions, and they should be wearing masks and socially distancing and doing all the things that you're saying to them. And so if they're not following those health conditions, you as an employer can make an argument that you have good cause to let them go, and they should not get unemployment because they were fired for good cause. And that is an argument you can make as well. So I would let your employees know that.
Great. Thank you, Secretary McCamley. Kathy, are there any other questions that you would like us to address?
I think that covers it. And again, I'm just so appreciative of how responsive both you and Secretary McCamley have been in keeping in contact with us and being a resource for the industry, because as you both stated, these are unprecedented times, and it really does take teamwork to get through it. So again, on behalf of the hospitality industry, thank you so much for doing this today.
Great. Well, thank you. And thank you to Secretary McCamley. This industry is the second largest private sector employer in the state. And this industry in particular has just been hit so hard by the pandemic. And if I can just wrap up today by saying we have to continue to push through, because we know this industry can come back. We know that travel and tourism is not going away. I just want to encourage all of you to please continue to do your absolute best in implementing these COVID safe practices. Please get certified, and we can't give up hope. We got to continue, and I greatly appreciate all of you so much. I feel like tourism is almost like a family across the state, and we're going to get through this together. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.